we had to resist the temptation of just serving one ICP well. We needed to have a pretty broad swath of users. And the way we sort of acknowledged that was like, rather than focus on personas, we focus on pain points. And for us, those universal pain points are like, it's super hard to get what's in your head into a format that others can visualize. And that's a universal pain point. How do we do that well? That's what we're focused on doing.
Welcome to The Peel. I'm your host, Turner Novak, founder of Banana Capital. Today's guest is Grant Lee, co-founder and CEO of Gamma, the AI-powered presentation platform building the anti-PowerPoint.
There's got to be a better way. Slides as a format created almost 40 years ago.
As someone who's made a lot of decks, it's refreshing how Gamma thinks about slides as words and narrative.
It becomes challenging when the medium you're working in forces you to instantly have to design at the same time. The storytelling, the structure are competing against how do I visually format and put this in a layout.
Gamma has extremely impressive metrics under the hood, growing from 0 to 50 million users and $50 million in ARR with only 30 employees. They've had 0 employee attrition and have a negative lifetime burn rate, meaning they have more cash in the bank than they've raised.
Constraints begets creativity. Forcing yourself to raise a bunch of money almost inherently means you're going to take a more lax approach.
We talk about Gamma's generalist approach to hiring, why a quarter of the team is designers.
If someone rushes immediately into the solution, it's usually a flag.
How they rebuilt their entire product to be AI native after ChatGPT launched.
We gave ourselves this 4-month sprint idea of we're going to do our first AI launch.
And how Gamma uses AI internally.
Every corner of the company tries to deploy AI.
A quick thank you to Anamitra and Gaurav at Afore, Shiyan at Hustle Fund, Evan at South Park Commons, and Voss at Accel for helping brainstorm great topics for Grant. A reminder, I publish episodes of The Peel every week with a back catalog of 100 episodes exploring the world's greatest startup stories just like this one. Tune in over the next few weeks for conversations with founders of WordPress, Handshake, and Intercom. Before we talk to Grant, I'm excited for the new presenting sponsor of The Peel, Ramp. Time is our most valuable resource, and it's impossible to get more of, unless you're one of over 40,000 companies using Ramp. It's the easy-to-use corporate card, bill payments, accounting, and expense management platform. The product is simple enough for startups, powerful enough for large enterprises, and the Ramp team is known for being one of the fastest shipping in tech. Issue cards, get spend visibility and control policies, manage approvals, vendors, travel, and close your books 8 times faster, all in one place. Stop chasing receipts, make your expenses submit themselves. Go to ramp.com/thepeel and get $250 just for signing up. That's ramp.com/thepeel. Time is money. Save both with Ramp. This episode is brought to you by Numeral. Numeral is the end-to-end platform for sales tax and compliance. They handle registration, ongoing filings, and their API provides sales tax rates wherever you need them with all the integrations you need. Numeral supports over 1,000 customers in both the US and globally. And they pride themselves on white glove, high touch customer service. Plus, they guarantee their work and they'll cover the difference if they mess anything up. They're fresh off a fundraise, raising an $18 million Series A from my friend Chetan Puttagunta at Benchmark. If you want to put your sales tax on autopilot, check out Numeral at numeralhq.com. That's NUMERALHQ.com. for the end-to-end platform for sales tax and compliance. Thank you, Numeral and Ramp. And now let's talk to Grant. Grant, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to do this. I kind of wanted to start off just really quick for people who don't know, what is Gamma?
Yeah, so I guess the easiest way to describe it is we're trying to build the anti-PowerPoint. PowerPoint's been the sort of language of business. People use it to present, share their ideas, and we're trying to build a tool that kind of fundamentally changes how you might approach sharing your ideas.
So this is maybe a rhetorical question for somebody who knows what Gamma is. For somebody who doesn't know and is not familiar, why is that a big deal? Because you think PowerPoint, it's just some slides and pretty straightforward.
Yeah, so I think with PowerPoint and many of the sort of traditional tools, you get dropped into this canvas, and you as a person, you're forced to be a designer. You're kind of moving pixels around, resizing boxes, aligning, formatting. And I think the vast majority of us aren't, visual designers. And so we want to take a fundamentally different approach, which is rather than being design first, what if it could be, design later or design last, and much, much more lean into content first. You start with your ideas, we help you shape them. And so we want to just change that approach because we think it actually aligns better with how most people actually want to create content.
And it sounds like people are liking it and using it. I know there's like some public stuff that you've been kind of talked about how well the company is doing, but what sort of like current state of the business?
Yeah, so we passed 50 million users, 50 million ARR, been profitable. I think a lot of what we pride ourselves is in trying to scale the company really efficiently too. And so that inherently means you need to have, some pocket of users that love your product that are pulling you into the market or pulling the market towards you. And we feel lucky that, we're still early, but I've been able to achieve some great early traction.
Yeah, I think I saw that you're profitable. I think this was in an article that you have more in the bank than you've raised. That's always a good kind of like a humble brag in like VC backed startup world.
Yeah, it's a stat that doesn't get maybe shared very often, which is
Yeah.
lifetime negative net burn, more money in the bank than you've ever raised, which yeah, feels good.
Yeah, I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But I think the thing I thought was most interesting is you have about 30 employees. And like, how do you be so efficient with such a small team? Because I feel like everyone that's kind of come back in vogue. Like, I feel like 21, like the metrics that KPIs people would lead with is like, we have X employees, and you have pretty, pretty small team for kind of how far you've gotten it. What do you think is kind of the secret to doing that?
I attribute it a lot back to just how the company was formed. So we started off with three co-founders, but then we had like kind of a founding team of seven, and we all came from a company called Optimizely. We had worked together for 5+ years then, and now it's been basically almost a decade working together, and really just having that foundation of trust, but also very complementary skill sets. So three co-founders, my two co-founders, John and James. One was the VP of product at Optimize, the other was a senior engineer. And then myself, coming more from an operating background, was basically leading finance and strategy there. And so, I think each of us kind of brings different skill sets to the table. And then we look at the broader team, we had, amongst our first seven, we had our head of design, we had a front end engineer, we had two back end engineers. And so we had everything we needed to kind of, get the early versions of the product moving in the right direction. And then since then, we've kind of continued to layer on. And I think that just means that, when you think about having the sort of leanest team possible, you need all the sort of positions filled. And you need to have good, each one of those need to be filled with someone that's obviously highly capable and can move fast. And then the more that you can bring together that trust factor, people that work together, that have that muscle memory, that allows you to also just navigate much quickly than you could otherwise.
So I saw specifically the first hire you made. I don't know if this was a part of the 7-person founding team or just the fourth after the co-founders. Was you hired a designer, which I guess is kind of, maybe you'd say that's ironic with your like an AI driven design company. There should be no designers. Maybe there should be a bunch of designers. So why hire a designer as the first person?
Yeah, I feel like others, when they've looked at kind of the makeup of our company, have always said that it seems like we've overinvested in, design because, almost a quarter of our team is are product designers.
Oh wow.
And, when you compare that to many other organizations, like that's just not the same makeup. And we always believed like that was the right investment, especially early on. Zach, who was, to your point, who you're mentioning here, our first sort of design hire, he's our head of design. He is so gifted in many different ways, but what he brings to the table is this ability to really explore many different ideas and help us kind of understand the different directions we might pursue. And I think only through kind of prototyping and like iterating with customer feedback and doing that like relentlessly over a long time horizon can you finally get to a point where like the product can be useful, can be valuable. And we knew that we needed that on day one. Like we couldn't make progress without that sort of core component as kind of a strength of the team. And so, yeah, it's been awesome having him on board since almost basically day one from the company foundation formation, and then since then having him be able to build out a team around him.
I think there's this concept of kind of a full stack designer where they can not only design but also code and build stuff. And has that been a big piece of it too?
Yeah, 100%. I think, and this is becoming maybe more obvious now just in this era of, AI and all the advancements here. But I do think in many ways this is the sort of the rise of the generalist. And whether it's, full stack designers or a PM that knows how to code or, a marketer that can do both the research as well as like going in and actually synthesizing that, coming up with a strategy and actually then deploying that through different campaigns. Like all that's becoming more and more important for like the average person to be able to play a variety of roles and not to be necessarily siloed as a specialist. And so, yeah, absolutely, that sort of full stack design has been a designer like someone like Zach who can code, who is also visual and can also sit down with the customer and like deeply empathize with that feedback. That's a superpower, and bringing that all together just gives you as a company a huge advantage.
Is there a trick for just hiring people like that? Like, how do you just kind of screen and make sure when you're adding to the team that, like, oh, this person is good at understanding the customer, can also build the stuff for them, can make it look good, is a good boss and manager, and like help us recruit? Like, just like, how do you find these just full stack generalist people?
Yeah, there's like this intangible that you sort of look for, which is someone that's just continuously learning, like they're hungry to learn. Oftentimes what you'll find is like someone as they progress in their career, their desire to learn new things like quickly diminishes.
Oh yeah, I definitely get caught in that rut sometimes. I'm like constantly, yeah. That's part of doing this podcast is like, okay, who can I meet? Just like a new industry, like the episode. By the time this comes out, it'll be a couple weeks ago. But I had Sanjit Biswas at Samsara, and they do kind of like Internet of Things, physical sensors and devices for transportation, and it's just kind of an interesting topic. Know nothing about it. Feel like I learned a lot from it. So it's just like you just got to expose yourself to it.
Yeah, you got to expose yourself. And some people just are constantly trying to stretch their own sort of thinking and imagination. And that comes with learning new tools, new techniques, new frameworks. And when you talk to someone like the energy they express, like the way they talk about things, if they're expressing these new things with like a level of excitement, and you can even ask them to teach you about some of these concepts, like how deep can they go? I think that those are all signs of someone that is just continuously learning, no matter where they are in their career, whether they're fresh out of college or there's someone that's 10 plus years. You want to feel that energy and someone that really just enjoys kind of teaching. And like if they know the concept well enough to teach it, means that they're probably armed with the right tools to be able to take a ton of ownership, high agency, move fast. And so those are absolutely the things you're trying to suss out during the interview process.
How would you structure that? I know we're getting way off script here already, but how would you suss that out in an interview? Like figuring out like what kind of things would you ask and kind of figure out where to like dig deeper on?
Yeah, I mean, there's maybe a few common techniques. Like one is just asking them to literally teach you something. Something that they're passionate about could be completely not even work related. Just have them teach you about something they're passionate about and see kind of how they articulate those things. Is it well structured? Have they been thinking about this for a long time? Do they do a good job of getting you excited and like understanding and appreciating the topic? And then the other is like to ask them to talk about a challenge that they've experienced and kind of overcome. And so oftentimes you'll have somebody that can describe the situation with some level of humility and be able to actually go deep into understanding the problem. If someone rushes immediately into the solution, it's usually a flag. It's like, okay, they're able to really quickly jump to something and like, kind of highlight the how great they were. But a lot of what greatness looks like actually is you encounter a problem, you realize that's actually like the surface level problem, and you dig like 10 levels deeper. And someone that can actually articulate how they understood like what the true problem was and then went about trying to fix the problem and then realizing, hey, actually the initial solution maybe wasn't the right solution. I went back and iterated. Like those are the things you really want to hear about. And especially if it's something that's super challenging in that person's career, like they should be able to go into depth. If they aren't able to, it just means that again they probably are like a surface level thinker. They haven't gone to the extent of like really learning and trying to go deep on anything.
How do you, as a candidate, I don't know if you've ever been through that in your process, but like, how do you do that without, I don't know, making yourself like setting yourself up in the wrong way or setting yourself up in the right way, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean the tricky thing with like interviews in general, like some people end up becoming really polished because they're just they practice a ton, they become good interviewers. I think in general, like the more I've done interviews myself, it's just like when you talk to people, you want it to feel authentic, and you can kind of start getting a glimpse of like how much are they trying to have the sort of the PC version of the story, or like trying to make themselves look good. And we all know the truth is somewhere going to be somewhere in the middle, and you want to be able to hear some texture to the story. It's not just all always great. There's some areas where there's wrinkles, and you got to go in and be able to have someone that's willing to appreciate that and go into detail. Otherwise, they're just holding back a bunch, and if that's the case, it's like hard to trust whether or not how much of it is being honest and authentic.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people kind of forget. Maybe if you're just like a younger, like a student, maybe, and you're interviewing for your first job or something, you kind of forget like this whole interview thing. We kind of make a big deal about it at certain maybe phases of your career. But at the end of the day, like 99% of the time is just sitting there working, talking with people, like, and no one knows the answer. Like, I'm sure you don't sit there with the team like, oh, here's my polished, like researched response to this thing. You're like, I don't know, let's just figure it out or something. So
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a lot of it is, yeah, passing the elevator test. Like, could you stand with them, and like, is this someone you gain energy from? And so if it's a person that all they say is like about, how great they are, it's hard to imagine you wanting to spend a lot of time with. But if it's someone that is genuinely curious about the world, that's great, because that means there'll be an infinite number of things you can work on with this person, and you're never going to, end up being in a place where there's actually not enough work for this person to work on.
yeah. And I kind of want to talk a little bit more about the Gamma product, AI, some of the stuff you're kind of thinking about and using. So what's been maybe the most interesting use case that you've seen for the Gamma product? Just yeah, I'm assuming you have some stuff off the top of your head, but
Yeah, I mean, the initial wedge for the product was just a way for people to create presentations very simply and quickly. And so, what you'll end up, seeing is a lot of people creating a lot of external facing content. So if they need to share something with a customer, a client, a partner, and that could be in the form of like a pitch deck, a proposal, some sort of onboarding or training. Those are all things that traditionally are kind of a pain in the butt to try to create in traditional tools like PowerPoint, and not only just create but also then edit and refine and like then actually share and get feedback on. And so we're just trying to make it dead simple for people to create those forms of content where all that can be done very fluidly, could be shared, you can iterate on it. Editing isn't a pain in the butt, and get your stuff out there quickly.
yeah, I think going back to kind of the beginning, I know your kind of initial insight was basically it's not design, it's like writing. Like it's like playing like that's how most people like when I was kind of like I was listening to some other podcasts you'd done and I was reflecting, I was like, yeah, you're right. Whenever I make a PowerPoint, like I just kind of write it out first. Even if it's in like the first slide, I'll just like make some bullet points that are like the title of each slide. And then maybe you'll, expand on the bullet point and go a little bit deeper. But that's historically I've always done it.
Totally. Yeah. I think that's, yeah, most of us, we want to have some general structure or like outline that we have in mind, maybe the story that you're trying to tell, so that there's some cohesion between like, what is the main message and like how do you then build upon that. And so yeah, it becomes challenging when the medium you're working in forces you to instantly have to design at the same time, because then those two things are at odds. The storytelling, the structure, are competing against like how do I visually format and put this in a layout that puts it in a way that's consumable by the the actual reader or the person you're presenting to. And so those are things we're trying to remove, that sort of friction or that tension, and making it much more fluid in the process.
Yeah, because I think about when I do the deck for my fund, when I'm fundraising, like I made my designer made it in Figma like a year or two ago. And so I just kind of use what she gave me and I'll like try to add a new slide that's like sort of in between some things. And I'm like kind of redesigning it and like kind of swapping what's on what slide, but I'm like kind of trying to fit it into the structure that's already there. So yeah, I can definitely see how that. And so the way I'm just thinking about like how this might play out with Gamma, like do I basically type in like a chat box and I can just say like, hey, can you split this from two slides into three? Or like, can you change the color? Can you add a chart? Like, how does that usually play out when I'm interacting with it?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think we want eventually to be just so many different entry points, because sometimes it's like you have, just a topic and you just want like, give me something so I have a rough template I can start with, a really good first draft. That's fine. Other times maybe you've done some research, maybe it's in ChatGPT or a different tool, and you've actually crafted like the sort of the end to end sort of narrative you want. And then like, how do you visualize that? You can drop that entire thing into Gamma. And then there may be an instance where like there's maybe existing documents like a Word doc, a PDF that you're working off of, something that was long form that you want to make more visual. And we want you to be able to upload those documents and say, hey, take this 100-page document and help me turn this into a 5-pager, because I need to get in front of an audience and like communicate this more effectively. And I know a lot of the information, but I don't know the best way to turn that 100-page document into something that's a little bit more visual and consumable. And so, obviously, many different entry points. We want all those to feel effortless. Like you should be able to do that no matter what the occasion is, and Gamma can help you then shape those the rough ideas into something that's more refined.
And this is just a question I had thinking about. You said you generating about 50 million in revenue. A couple, I think it said like 100,000 or a couple 100,000 customers. What is that right?
Yeah, a few hundred thousand customers.
So what are people paying for? Like when you're building this, you're like, this is free, this is paid. How did you kind of decide? Maybe it was a process of doing that, but how did that kind of all evolve over time?
Yeah, so we basically have a freemium model. It's based on today AI usage. So all new users get a bucket of AI credits, and then when they use that all, they can either stay on the free plan, which allows you to still use Gamma, but you have to basically manually update the content and do quote unquote the old fashioned way by as a human still entering and playing around with the building blocks. And even that has been useful for a lot of users because those core primitives still allow you to manually create stuff much faster than you would in other tools. And then if you need more AI kind of guidance or assistance, then you can upgrade to one of our paid plans. We think of our AI as being like the sort of expert design partner for you, as if you're sitting right next to a great designer and you can actually have them help you craft and shape your content quickly. And so we want that to again feel effortless, and anytime you need that, you can just tap your design partner, in this case Gamma, and they'll help you kind of really refine your content faster than you could do it on your own.
So it's like instead of just emailing my designer back or texting them back and saying, hey, can you change this thing, change the colors, I want to go this different direction, the product just kind of does it for you.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think today a lot of the bottleneck is like either you don't have a designer on staff at all, or maybe yeah, sometimes you outsource it to an agency, or you just don't have much of your own design skills, and so the capabilities are limited. And so what you have to do is try to outsource it. We want to replace the need for that for the vast majority of use cases where you could just get by leaning on Gamma a bit more. And so many people we talk to, especially kind of in the more corporate environment, their bottleneck is like, yeah, even if they have a design team, they oftentimes don't have enough of their time to be able to do a lot of the iteration back and forth. And so they that time is reserved for like the most important, like super high polished outputs, but the day-to-day presentations or decks or things that need to be created, there's nobody there to help with that. And we want to be able to step in and serve those users right away.
And this is something that's maybe you did unconventionally. So you talked about like a pretty horizontal approach. I feel like generally in startups and like the VC kind of conventional wisdom is like go super niche, super vertical on a specific thing. And you didn't do that. Like I'm just curious why? Because most people, the advice would say like, oh, pick like, you know, management consultants specifically, or like founders raising their pre-seed round specifically. So why did you go so horizontal instead of super niche?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two parts to this answer. The first is really just trying to think about our own founder ambition. Like we set out to create a new standard. We want this tool to be ubiquitous. We know that's super challenging. Like it's not going to be easy to create something that even has a chance at replacing a daily active tool like PowerPoint that's everywhere around the world. But that was our ambition. Like we believed we can create a better way. We want to create a new standard. The only way to do that is to create something that can be horizontal in nature, so that such that if you're an educator, you can use it. If you're, in the corporate world, you're a marketer, you can use it. If you're a consultant, freelancer, solopreneur, small business owner, all of these types of users should be able to benefit from what we're creating. And so that was our ambition. Like from day one, we knew that's what we wanted. And so horizontal was only sort of mechanism of trying to fulfill that longer term vision and dream. And the second thing is like, even if that were the long-term vision, oftentimes people will say, okay, we'll just start with one ICP. Like just try to serve like, salespeople, for instance. I think that ends up becoming much more challenging than sort of like it's easier said than done, right? Because what ends up happening is like you try to serve that one ICP pretty well, and inevitably they have very like specific things that end up needing to like be tailored to their use case. And so what you end up doing is like creating a hyper specialized tool that maybe the salespeople do get a ton of benefit out of. But when you start zooming out, like none of what you've built over the past couple of years are then beneficial to like the consultant or beneficial to the educator. And so inevitably you've already created like this, you know, verticalized tool or vertical tool, even though your long-term ambition might have been to build horizontally. So when we thought about just the sequencing, we knew that both to address number one, which is our own founder ambition, and to actually have a shot at that, like we had to resist the temptation of just serving one ICP well. We needed to have a pretty broad swath of users. And the way we sort of acknowledged that was like rather than focus on personas, we focus on pain points. So not ICPs, not personas, but really the pain point that a user might have, and what are those universal pain points. And for us, those universal pain points are like it's super hard to get what's in your head into a format that others can visualize. Like getting what's in your head into other people's head requires this sort of visualization piece that is really, really hard. And that's a universal pain point. How do we do that well? That's what we're focused on doing.
So do you think this is applicable for everyone, like any kind of category of company creation? Or do you think it only works if there's an opportunity to build like a super horizontal tool that specifically has kind of like pain points like this?
No, yeah, I definitely think this is definitely not the only approach. There's some markets out there where the TAM is probably big enough just to go after that vertical alone, and maybe it's just so underserved too by incumbent tools that it's almost a flip of this, which is like maybe incumbent tools are more horizontal in nature. That vertical is actually a very, very large, juicy TAM. And to have a verticalized tool is actually the right approach, especially if the founders like that aligns with their ambition. Like, hey, we want to serve like, the legal market, for instance, and that we believe is a big enough market. And incumbent tools, are going to be too generalized to not serve that market well. And we believe it's a massive TAM. Let's actually build specifically for that. I think there's definitely merit in doing that. And there's that makes sense for certain markets. Founders, they should always ask, is that market itself big enough? Is it growing? Is it expanding? Is a horizontal approach fundamentally limited in serving that market? And it's a good sort of thought exercise before just assuming. You should go through the exercise of just asking, like, what do you believe to be true years from now?
Yeah, and actually, you super crazy on that point of like legal market TAM. So I think I saw a tweet from Patrick Carlson at Stripe. I believe the stat was something like, though, when you see those billboards on the side of the road for personal injury lawyers, where it's like, oh, did you get in an accident? Like, call this number. It's like 1% of GDP or something in the US. Just like that market of like suing people after getting in an accident or something.
Yeah, and it's growing, right? And it's like that's what you want to look for. It's like it's already like a meaningful amount, and it's growing. Like, yeah, then it's like, okay, well, there's probably something there. You want to move where the markets are experiencing some sort of organic tailwinds, and then try to capture that in that moment too.
What is the TAM for just slides and presentations? I didn't even look this up. Do you know what it is?
I mean, the Microsoft like Office doesn't really share too much in terms of like just the revenue, but it's in the billions. When you look at the user base of slides, it's in the billions, and the majority of that is PowerPoint, but you have Google Slides and the other incumbent tools, and so even just the user base alone is in the billions. And I think for us to be successful longer term, like yes, we're going to carve out good chunk of people that are maybe using incumbent tools, but also then create just new market opportunity. There's a lot of people that even slides aren't something they're super well versed in, so they don't create them. But in the future, when digital content is going to be even more important in terms of connecting with others, your customers, your partners, like they need simpler tooling. We can be that tooling for them. And for those that had never even adopted really ingrained sort of PowerPoint into their workflows, Gamba can be that solution for them. And so it's almost like creating a brand new market that just has latent demand, but hasn't yet been fulfilled by an existing product.
Yeah. How do you think about just generally sort of this whole office tool workplace? Like when you just think about like meeting summaries, presentations, docs, calls, like when there's a lot of people kind of playing in this space. And I think if you just kind of fast forward, you think 5 years forward, 10 years forward, like they're all kind of converging. I don't know if there's a strategic reason of starting with slides or if it was just curiosity and interest. And then how you just think about it over the long term, how everything's going to play out.
Yeah, I mean, that's the challenging thing is, things are evolving so quickly. Hard to know how things will all pan out. We started with slides because one, this was actually just trying to solve my own pain point. So the last startup I was at was acquired. I went back into more of an advisory and consulting role where I actually started my career. And, I was staying up late at night trying to actually put together, synthesize kind of like information back to a client, back to a customer. And, just thinking about like just dreading that moment of actually going into Google Slides, having to like spend so much time formatting and like getting like even just staring at that blank page gave me the first moment of realization, which is like there's got to be a better way. Slides as a format created almost 40 years ago, and we it's such an important medium for communication. Like, is there a different way we can approach this? So that was kind of like the initial okay, something interesting. And then what we actually ended up doing was like just building for several months, kind of prototyping the initial versions of Gamma just to give ourselves our own sort of level of convictions. Like we started realizing that slides for most people isn't probably a super high NPS sort of product. It's one that people have just gotten used to the way things have always been done, but never questioned like, okay, what if the primitives or building blocks are fundamentally different? And when we thought about just the growing need for like digital communication, we wanted something that kind of acknowledged where things were already moving. So, slides as a format fixed in sort of aspect ratio or dimensions and made for an era where we're all sort of staring at the same projector or we needed things to be printed on pieces of paper. And when we think about where things were already heading, like much more of the communication can be async and viewed on different devices like your phone or tablet or, a monitor. And so why not have something that was more mobile friendly or mobile responsive by default? Why not have something that was more interactive and multimedia rich and all the things that, PowerPoint you might be able to hack together, but it wasn't built for that. Like, what if we lean more into like where we think things were already going to be going? And we just saw such a massive opportunity that it just felt like, yeah, even if we didn't know necessarily all the answers on day one, it was going to be a fun journey to go on and it'd be plenty to build off of and we'd learn and kind of iterate along the way.
Yeah, I think to your point of like how the format has kind of evolved, right? It's always been this kind of like landscape view rectangle thing. But if you think like probably like half of emails are opened on phones. I don't know what the stat is, but like you kind of, somebody's looking at a vertical screen on their phone, and then you basically limit the size to be like a third of the screen in this little rectangle in the middle. I remember the first time I saw a vertical deck, I was like, oh shit, that was actually pretty smart. Like, that's a good idea. And this was probably like 2019 ish. And so this is probably, you were doing this around 2020 ish.
End of 2020 is when we first formed the company. Yeah.
Okay. And then I think with this whole kind of horizontal vision, I think that kind of impacted how you kind of raised a little bit of money in the beginning in the early days. How did that kind of play out?
Yeah, we knew we needed to raise enough to assemble the early team. So I mentioned even just the initial 7, and then we got to a team of about 12 before we did our first like bigger AI launch. We knew we needed enough to build kind of the scaffolding for the initial product, then to be able to get that into the hands of users and iterate. And so we raised a decent sized pre-seed round. It was a little bit under 3 million, and that gave us the chance to kind of form the initial team. And then we ended up raising another 4 million as part of our seed round. This is when we had basically just launched our private beta. And again, I think, part of the founder journey, for anybody that's just getting started is, try to look at other companies that are kind of in your category or might need to follow a similar path. So for us, that's like other horizontal platforms that been created before us. And so the Notions, the Airtables, even like the Figmas of the world, which all took many, many years to kind of get to a point where what they were building didn't feel like just a toy. It was like something that could be used for real work. And I think we always acknowledge that up front. It was like even something as simple as presentations, there's a ton of surface area to cover. And so to like earn the right to be a tool that's actually used and depended on by somebody outside of your organization, like it takes a ton of effort. And we knew it would take us some time. And with time means you need enough runway. With enough runway means you need enough cash in the bank. So we ended up raising in a way that just try to factor all that in.
How did you get people to buy into it? Because it's like a horizontal tool. Like most people are like, this won't work. Like it's impossible. Go to market won't work. I don't like this idea. How'd you get around that?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely got a bunch of rejections. It wasn't everybody, but I think the ones that believed in us, there was probably two things that maybe caught their attention. One is when we created our very first sort of pitch deck, we actually built it as a prototype of Gamma. So like it was basically showing what, the possibilities were, even if it was super rudimentary. And so it had those elements. It was hybrid sort of writing, like a document slash deck like medium. It was interactive. It was multimedia rich. And so it had all the principles we were sort of trying to lean into. And so people could kind of, squint their eyes and maybe see a little bit into what, the feature we're trying to describe. And then the other half was people that kind of were the prototypical user. So Amy, who led our seed round, she basically was, product marketing manager, was at Stripe, was at Twitter early on. And so, face the bottlenecks we were describing, which is like they had to create a lot of content. They don't always have design resources. And so you're just limited by what you can do on your own and then just constantly waiting. What if with a tool like Gamma, you could self-serve much more of that? And for like the average, professional knowledge worker, they can go into a tool and actually craft and shape their ideas. Like that was exciting to her. And so I think it was like a combination of those two where do a little bit of showing, not just telling, but then also, resonating with somebody that just understands your vision and why your product deserves to be in the market.
So how do you find the right investors then in that kind of situation? Like, did you do a lot of outbound? Did you spend a lot of time getting to know people like in the years before? Like, is it a volume game, just getting in front of the right people?
It's definitely a volume game, but to your point, it is a game. And so the way I think founders just structure the game, the early on, like you want to, just try to build relationships. So, the best way to go into any fundraise is like that. Obviously, already have some warm relationships. The other best way is also to go in with momentum. And so, if you're super super early, the way to show momentum is maybe going with a prototype, something that already shows that you've been thinking about this problem, that you've built enough conviction yourself. And then when you start, pitching early investors, you're going to get a ton of no's. The folks that say yes, you can ask them two questions. One, like, what is it about your pitch that, resonated with them? Like, was there something that really stood out? Why are they choosing to invest? And two, you can ask them, who else should I be talking to? Who else do you think might, this message or this pitch might resonate with? And you're just doing that over and over again. The funny part about like our own founding during our pre-seed round, this is end of 2020, peak pandemic. I was actually living in London at the time, and so I was doing all of my pitches late into the night, to the 1 a.m., 2
Like
a.m.
Pacific time, yeah.
And so I was locked in, and we didn't have a very big place in London, renting out like kind of small apartment. So I was stuck in the sort of laundry room because that was the only place that was like soundproof enough while the rest of the family could sleep. And I would just do 5-6 hours of pitches back to back, like just straight Zoom. And I was fortunate because peak pandemic, that was acceptable practices, just like do back to back Zooms. And I would just rinse and repeat the strategy of like meet somebody, they said no, move on. Meet somebody, they say yes, ask them those two questions, and then line up back to back, basically 2 weeks straight worth of meetings to a point where we had enough, to fill the initial round.
Amazing. Yeah, it's definitely not glamorous. Like a lot of people think of fundraising as this like, wine and dining. And it's like it's basically just like eating shit until you get enough of the way there. Like it's usually that's how it goes.
Totally. I would say, I don't know. Today it feels maybe slightly different, but yeah, back then that was absolutely the mindset I went into, which is 2 weeks are going to be brutal. I've just accepted that, and I'm going to stay in this laundry room until things are done.
Yeah. Well, and then to the point, I think you guys are doing really good today, but you've never really raised like big, sexy, hyped up rounds. Like VCs don't really talk about you. That's usually a signal that there's like a lot of VCs invested is when they're always talking about something like hyping it up. Why did you never like raise a ton of money and and go down that path?
Part of this is just like I think the mentality of the founding team that we've always had this notion that raising too much money has a ton of potential downsides, especially if you do it too early. Because I think what you want early on as a founder is one, to build good habits amongst your organization, like things that are the foundation for how you want the rest of the company to operate in the future, and like the mindset, like what is that sort of scrappiness mindset? I think, PG talks about like the cockroach mode that you can go into, and like, yeah, like cockroaches don't need much to survive. And what can you do to make yourself like super resilient as a team? And you don't build resilience out of just luck. It's a lot of like day to day, like this is the grind. And part of that scrappiness needs to come through with just how you operate. And I think that naturally then bleeds into the culture you have, right? Like you want your culture to be one where the early on you're building the early parts of the team, and then later on you want that culture to be solidified such that you hire the next 10 100 people. They all have the same DNA. It's all the same. Like we know what we look for. This is what Gamma represents. These are the type of people that fit in well here. And then the people that don't, that's fine, we're going to move on. And so we wanted to really invest in that. When you're also early on, constraints in my mind, begets creativity. You're building a tool that's horizontal. You need a ton of creativity. Forcing yourself to raise a bunch of money almost inherently means you're going to kind of take a more lax approach, and you're going to say, okay, money's going to help solve most of these problems. I'm going to hire the person to do the job versus do the job yourself, and like recognize that most of it is in your own control, and you have probably enough of the ingredients within your core team to do a lot of the work. And so those are all things that we kind of talked a lot about early on. And anytime there was an opportunity to raise more, we'd ask ourselves, like, do we really need it? Like, is it preventing us from achieving our long-term ambition? And if not, we're going to keep heads down and keep building. And we really haven't wanted to divert from that core sort of mantra.
How has that impacted being able to recruit? Because I feel like part of the reason people raise money is so that there's like a halo around it from a recruiting perspective, but also just, Facebook will give you $1 million, we'll give you more, or whatever the strategy is there.
I would say it's made recruiting harder in some ways, but it has, I think, a ton of upside and value in other ways. When you are forced to play the sort of dollar for dollar game, and you're competing against the giants of the world that can give insane packages, you end up inevitably finding people that are much more mercenaries than they are missionaries. And so for us, we always look for people that where the core product, like what we're doing, resonates with them on some level. And for instance, if you're coming in and doing an interview and you've already spent time in the tool and you're like, wow, I actually like, even if I don't get this job, I'm going to go on and use this tool. Something about it has kind of resonated. And those are the type of people that, we found that once we bring them in house, it's like, there's so much love and energy that they pour into the product. And of course we want to have like super competitive offers, and we want to pay, top of market and give good equity, and those things all come packaged. But, at the same time, like only kind of trying to satisfy the competing offer of like a massive AI company, I think in many ways sets you up for long-term obstacles that you may not even can even foresee. So what we're trying to balance now is like, how do we, one of the biggest benefits of raising is you set the market rate, and so people can say, hey, what is the value of this business? How do I even think about equity? Because equity for most people is still super opaque, hard to understand. And we try to spend a lot of time providing education. Even this comes kind of from my finance days, but like even at Optimizing, I spent a lot of time just trying to educate people around like, how should you even value your options? What are the different considerations? There's a lot of the fine print that if you don't really understand the differences, then what's on paper may not actually translate into true value for you. And so we do the same with all of our candidates. Anybody that has like competing offers, I try to provide a super objective, like, hey, this is how you might think about things. I'm not trying to overly sell them. I just want them to know like how they should actually value certain things, such that they can go in and make an educated and informed decision. And I hope that many more founders will do that, which is like take the onus of actually trying to educate your candidates as much as possible, so that whether they decide to join you or not, like many years down the road, you feel like you can sleep at night because they made the right decision with all the right information.
Yeah. I think too, there's the value of like the tangible, or the tangibility, or like the realistic chances of the equity like being worth anything. Just like at the end of the day, like if it's a public company, it's like a liquid. If it's a startup, it's private. There's a little bit of uncertainty around like, what is this thing actually worth really at the end of the day? Like, can I get anything for it if I needed to sell? You might have to take a discount. But just generally, like I think, did you guys have raised a total of $23 million, I think?
That's right.
So I don't know, if just generally speaking, there's usually like a 1x liquidation preference on the equity that investors put in. So if I'm somebody who's like considering working at Gamma, I'm just like, okay, if the company sells, the investors get their 23 million, and then Like we all get our pool. That's a pretty low bar. You're doing 50 million in revenue. I don't think people are going to be valuing you at half of ARR. Like, maybe you're a little bit higher, but like 10x. I usually think 10x ARR is just like fairly reasonable number for just like a healthy growing software company. So yeah, it's like 500 million is like that's pretty reasonable. Like you guys are in a great spot from that perspective too. So I feel like not a lot of people think about that. Like if the company gets acquired, like if you had raised $1 billion, and we'll just use that same number and say you're really only worth 500 million, everyone gets nothing. The investors don't even get their money back. So there's a lot more that goes into it than that. But that's generally like like a first look is like, you just think how much is the company raised? And like, is it even worth that much?
I mean, the math you just described, less than 10%, less than 5% of candidates ever even get into that, that math. And to your point, yes, it's like when you break it down, there are things that seem to be, you can present that in a logical way, and then that decision ends up becoming easier. But yeah, the tough thing is, what when you are competing against the large, someone that's raised a ton of money, they do have that external sort of credibility or validation that somebody believes they're worth, X billion, X $100 million. And oftentimes candidates will give that much more sort of, rely on that much more than anything else because it's just easier to understand. And it's a, quote unquote, a trusted professional investor that has done their homework and has put that money in. I think when for us, like we as founders have come through a few different kind of eras of like startups, and we've seen both the good outcomes, the mediocre outcomes, and the terrible outcomes. And oftentimes like the mediocre and terrible outcomes, the founders and investors maybe still do fine. To your point, 1x, they'll get their money back. Founders might still get a little bit something. In those cases, the employees almost get nothing. And I've been both the employee and now a founder. And a lot of what I fear is like, I want, in the future, if Gamma has a great outcome, like every employee should be there to celebrate. Like it should be something we are celebrating together. We are all owners of the business. And that can only happen if kind of you're being thoughtful about that and trying to structure things the right way from day one, not waiting until, you've already made it and have huge success. It's like you need to be thinking about day one such that in all outcomes, if the company has some meaningful outcome, like everybody can celebrate.
Yeah. And this is like a little bit of a sidebar, but Optimizely, what was that company again? I've heard of them before. I've actually never heard. So I'm just curious, like, what do they do, and like, how did that go for you guys as a team? It sounds like you kind of all came from there, the early team.
Yeah, so Optimizely was started, it was actually one of the fastest growing YC companies back in the day. And they started off sort of in this space of A/B testing, and eventually kind of broadened that scope to be much more around just experimentation broadly. So, we are serving companies like Nike, Best Buys, these large companies that had to do a lot of digital experimentation and supporting them through our own platform. And so any team that needed to run experimentation at scale could lean on Optimize it to do that. And I'd say, the company when I joined, was Series A by time, and a little bit over 10 million in ARR. By the time I left, 100 million in ARR. So, by all means, like it was a business that definitely showed that there was a market for this and had grown and had global footprint. And I think at the outcome maybe wasn't as great as what we would have all hoped. Being one of the fastest growing YC companies at the time, I think the aspirations were to be, something that like super impactful and again a great outcome for employees. But we ended up being acquired, and I think one thing that a lot of now the Gamma early employees is like, we hope that one day, if we do have a great outcome, it's something we're all celebrating. It doesn't feel like we had left something on the table.
Yeah, and I feel like it's kind of like a little bit of a superpower. Is like you guys have all. I'm assuming you all work together at Optimizely, like in some capacity. So it's like, all right, it's like round two. It's like we already kind of know how to do this, how to work together.
Yeah, there's definitely a bit of that muscle memory, working together, knowing how, each other's styles, things that you almost don't need to say because it's just so obvious of how we work, and that obviously just improves kind of how frictionless things can be. So it's been extremely valuable, and all of the first seven I mentioned all still at Gamma. Actually, all of our employees, we haven't had an employee leave, and so it's like this continuity piece that's been that's been really helpful and something that we want to continue to sustain.
That's an insane stat. 30 people, no one's left yet over 5 years. I feel like that's got to be a record. I mean, I don't think I've ever met anyone like that scale over that period of time that hasn't anyone leave.
Yeah, I think it keeps the core team super, obviously, like the collaboration really tight, and it goes back to like being able to move as fast as possible.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of kind of like the team, so you were in London in the beginning. Like, were you guys all sort of all over the place, or was it just you that was remote? And I know now you're all in San Francisco, right? Like, how did that play out, and what did you learn about that evolution of how a team functions remotely versus in person?
Yeah, so I was in London actually for my wife's work. We were there for a couple years and first started Gamma, fundraised. I was out there. The rest of the team was all in San Francisco. So again, this is like peak pandemic. So we did have the question of, should we build a fully distributed team, or should we try to work together in person, or some sort of hybrid environment? And when we actually asked our first, I mentioned like the first seven, eventually like several more than that, kind of where should we be based, or like what is your optimal setup? Every one of them said we want to work in person in San Francisco, no desire to leave. And I was moving back eventually anyways, and so the decision was sort of made for us. And then basically we went into, okay, we know we're going to work together, but in San Francisco we're still sheltered in place, so we're going to find a place that allows us to do this, which is we found a 2-bedroom apartment, converted 2-bedroom apartment. We stuffed ourselves there, and like worked in different corners of the office with like huge air filters. And that was kind of like the first year. I was like just doing that in person because it felt right. It was like the right way for us to build, and we were just energized by being together.
That was pretty bold because I remember back that first year. I mean, especially like the first month or two when COVID kind of hit. I mean, it was literally like you look at someone with COVID, like you're gonna get it. Like we didn't fully understand. So was it pretty easy to convince people? And like you guys were you guys kind of all trying to like bubble and keep protect from the outside world, or
We definitely tried to do it in a safe way. So again, like, different quarters with air filters and whatnot. But it just, I think part of this is, yeah, because we had worked together for so long, it was easy just to like be candid, like, hey, or is this something you're comfortable doing? And if not, totally fine, work from home. But it was something that at that stage way easier to have those conversations, and because everybody was fully aligned, it just made sense. It was the right call.
yeah. And then so I know the first you mentioned you did like a private beta, you did a public beta, you did a launch. What were kind of all those different iterations of the product over time?
Yeah, so we started off early on doing basically a private beta. I was just putting up a landing page with and then creating this wait list. And it allowed us just to see who's even interested in what we're building. And, we're collecting, I think early on, it was like 4 or 5 thousand signups. And we could see kind of like the personas and like what they were looking for. We had a few different like open-ended questions just to gauge like, okay, what is the pain point we're solving for this particular
So
person?
this is you're still kind of sort of building it, or was there kind of
Still
like
building it. Yeah, it was very, very rudimentary. It had like the very basic ingredients of like, you could use it, you could present it. Was it super reliable? Was it super versatile?
questionable? Yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
But
And
you kind of
so
use the waitlist signups as like almost like getting some data on like who was interested in potentially trying something.
totally, yeah, and it kind of gives you then the ability to start. We didn't drop everybody from the waitlist directly into the product. We basically had batch them up. And so like every batch we let in a few hundred and we see what happens. And for the people that were more engaged, we would follow up and start talking to them and ask them like, what is it about the product that they were finding most valuable? What were the biggest things that were missing? How were they trying to use the product? And we kept doing that through the initial set of wait lists until we started seeing a pocket of users that was just organically coming back on their own. And they weren't our friends. They weren't people in our family that were just being nice, but there were people that just heard about the product and found some value in it. And that built up enough conviction to say, okay, we're ready to do our public beta launch, which is we're going to remove the wait list. Anybody that comes in can sign up, gets dropped directly into the product.
So how did you qualify that and know that it was time? Like, was there like, okay, we have like 5,000 retained daily or weekly users? Like, how did you know it was the right moment?
Yeah, we didn't set super aggressive sort of usage metrics. We had basically enough people coming back where, it wasn't even, I'd say it was like the low thousands. where people were just using the product. And in the feedback, there was enough pockets of users who were like, "Oh, this is great!" And then like they're trying to pull sort of features out of you, and so it was more of that sort of feelings like, okay, there's something here. And then we decided, like, we gave ourselves 4 months to essentially prepare for like a public beta, which is, add a little bit more polish, extend the functionality. We launched on public product hunt, which gave us also a chance to kind of exercise the muscle of like launching and getting word out there and just see what it takes to even announce a product, and flexing that muscle a little bit. And so yeah, and it ended up the product launch ended up doing great. Those are again our public beta launch. We ended up winning product of the day, week and month. And so
Oh,
gave us
wow.
that little bit of extra validation, like, hey, people are digging kind of the early version of the product.
So when was this? Like beginning of 2022, middle of 2022?
End of 2022, fall of 2022. Yeah,
Okay. Fall 22. So this was like around the time ChatGPT came out, maybe like a little bit before.
a little bit before. So the launch was pre AI. None of the product was still manually creating things. And then what we started realizing was, yeah, obviously AI was moving incredibly fast, both on the image side as well as the text side. And most presentations are a combination of text and visuals. And so we knew we needed to basically revamp our entire creation flow so that we could integrate AI into it.
Because yeah, I'm sure that like a lot of people listening to this have gone through this or thinking like there's probably a lot of people thinking about this. Like we need to re-architect our product for AI. I do want to kind of spend a couple minutes just talking about like how do you do that? Like so the moment that you realized you needed to do it was when it was right or like within the months after ChatGPT launched and you realized the different text and image capabilities.
Yeah, it was basically that is when we recognize. Well, we started by just playing around a bunch more ourselves internally, and very beginning of 2023, we gave ourselves again kind of like this 4 month sprint idea of like we're going to do our first AI launch. We, in the meantime, are going to completely rebuild the onboarding experience and like the first user experience.
Why was that important?
We knew that we needed to get people to understand the value of the product like immediately. Like we didn't have time to like get them to slowly understand or like adopt the product. They needed to see that in the moment, and that would kind of benefit us in two ways. Like, one, if they see the value and they activate, then they're more likely to obviously then retain themselves. And two, if that experience is so magical, they're going to tell other people about it, and there'll be an ability to generate this sort of word of mouth immediately, this organic word of mouth, which is obviously a powerful sort of lever.
So it was just like get that right in the beginning, like the first minute or however fast you got it to.
Exactly, yeah, because most of us are the Scott Belsky, selfish, vain, and lazy. Like most of us are that in the moment of like trying a new product. And so unless it resonates and like that first mile is something that could be magical, most people are never going to come back. And so we knew our current, like at the time, our current onboarding was a little bit just too like required the end user to do so much work to just even grok like what we were doing, like understand any amount of value. And the learning curve was so steep that we were going to lose too many people right out the gate. And so how could we flatten that learning curve dramatically and make that experience feel a little bit more magical? That was the whole goal of that 4 months.
So it sounds like you simplified the onboarding, like made it like there's like a quicker, I don't know, time to value or time to magic moment, whatever people want to use to describe that. What advice would you give? Like if I'm like, hey, Graham, I'm trying to our onboarding sucks, like it's too long. Like what should I do to get a better onboarding or faster, quicker onboarding experience?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to vary a ton for different products. Like sometimes you actually want to infuse maybe slightly more friction because it allows you to, yeah, allows you to like better qualify the type of users that you can serve, and then maybe through like either personalization or like a unique onboarding, like based on how they're maybe responding to different questions, you set them up for success. So like you're taking some of those inputs. For others, like you just want to get them like right out the gate, like understand enough about the product so that they come back. And I think we fell more into the latter, which is like we removed much more friction. We gave them a starting point, which is like just enter some general idea of what you need to create, and we'll show you what like a first draft could look like get them to understand like, hey, Gamma is actually a different way of creating content, but the building blocks don't need to feel intimidating. Like we can get you there and you can start playing around with it. within like the first 30 seconds of onboarding. So that was more of our goal. And I think most founders need to go in and understand like what, balancing that out. In some cases, like maybe adding a little bit more friction or getting people to integrate or getting people to like really get plugged in so that their first experiences feels like they're set up for success versus like a little bit too haphazard, like, oh, this is a toy, not a real product sort of situation.
So it sounds like did you sort of personalize the onboarding a little bit, like based on an answer, you'd like kind of tweak what path they went down?
We haven't yet done much of that, but this is something that we're starting to explore more is around personalization and segmentation. Our V1 of this, we didn't try to do that. The way you kind of went and chose your own adventure is just by nature of the prompt you would, put in. So like if you're creating something for like a sales template, like we'd give you a first draft that felt very relevant. And it didn't need to be overly engineered based on like, oh, are you, a certain type of user in a certain type of geography. We just let it be more prompt driven. We're now at the stage where I think there's other layers of like adding that friction where it may make sense. And with that comes the ability to personalize and give people, even more unique starting point that, you know, puts them in a place where they can actually see themselves using the tool, after the first run.
And I know there's this whole saying of like you want to, if you're building like an AI native product, you with every new model release, you want it to make your product better. Did you benefit from that over time?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, yeah, we are still benefiting from that. The advancements. It's cool to work on a product where the surface area obviously covers a ton. We have text, images, we'll have video, we'll have audio, we'll have many different formats that we'll be able to support. And because there's been advancements on underlying technology across the board, like yeah, anytime there's advances, we can say, hey, what are we going to pull in? How does this get passed to our end user in terms of value delivered? And it's just a constant sort of iteration, learning, putting that back in. And yeah, just the basic equation of every business is like pass as much value to your user as possible or your customer as possible at the lowest price, and like you can build something pretty sustainable.
Yeah, because I could imagine even if I'm thinking about using Gamma for like this podcast, and I think about like maybe your roadmaps and things you just indicated, like I could send you a link to something that's kind of like, I don't know, onboarding you to the peel or giving you like the TLDR, like here, read this for 2 minutes and like we'll get you going. Like it could literally be like a custom AI generated avatar of me saying like, hey Grant, it's Turner. Like super excited about Gamma. I'm excited to like jump into the podcast. Here's things like you could probably even incorporate like a prompt where I'm like, I want to talk to Grant about like building the product and advice for people on building AI native software. And you can like tailor that into what comes in through the actual link or presentation that you're getting from me. It probably changed dynamically too, I'm assuming.
Yeah, all of that. I mean, I think that's where it's going to be. We're just like barely scratching the surface. I think, at the end of the day, tools like ours, they're communication tools. And we obviously infuse a bunch of creativity into that as well, but allows you to express yourselves in ways that just weren't possible, in the past, like the sort of one to one versus like one to many, the sort of automated, the personalized, all that becomes easier over time. And yeah, we're just getting started.
it's kind of interesting that the core insight was that slides are sort of like a writing exercise, not a design exercise. That got even like more pronounced as you built it to be more AI native because like you're not really designing, like you're just saying, you're texting it and saying like this is what I want you to make. And there's probably like a luck element to that. I'm assuming like you didn't know ChatGPT was coming, you didn't know the LLMs were going to get this good.
No, yeah, we did not. I think it was great that we had a writing first approach because that as naturally extended sort of kind of the fluidity that you can work in Gamma because you are already in that flow state of writing, describing, and then in some cases you're leaning on AI to be more generative and can help you kind of extend your ideas and shape it in different ways. And so yeah, definitely, I think what where sort of luck meets sort of the preparation piece of it is that our vision has always been around like really simplifying and making it super easy and fast for the end user to shape their ideas. And just so happens like our approach married with AI has been one where we're actually able to like really fulfill on that promise much earlier on.
Was there anything that you wish you did differently when you redesigned it? Like when you kind of went back from scratch, like we're going to build this completely AI native, re-architect everything. I don't know how much the design changed, but anything specifically that like if you go back and tell yourself two and a half, 3 years ago, and just say like, just don't do this one part, or like skip this, or something?
It's like it's so hard to go back and say, because I think for us, and maybe this is because we came from optimizing, so much of how we approach things are like iteration, experimentation, testing things out. And so we get a lot of things wrong, but that's built into the system and how we build things. And so yeah, for sure, we probably could have navigated differently, but our approach probably would have been the same. And so we would have still tested, get things into the hands of users, test our assumptions, our hypotheses, and then go back and like refine that and just be relentless about doing that over and over. And so yeah, I don't think it would have changed much. I think it was just baked into how we operate.
Yeah. Okay. And I know you have about 50 million people that use the product today. You kind of talked about there's a wait list. You did the public launch, maybe it's like a couple thousand, maybe tens of thousand people. That's a pretty big gap. So how did you go from, a couple thousand people using it to like a pretty significantly large product today? Anything specifically that kind of happened over the past couple of years on that side, on the growth side?
Yeah, all of it was, I'd say the main inflection point through it all was that 4 month sprint leading to our first AI launch. And so this was, 2023, spring 2023, getting ready. We completely revamped the onboarding flow. And, at that time we had about 60,000 users, and we launched. And then, all of a sudden we're adding like, 5,000 users a day, 10,000 users a day, 20,000 users a day,
Oh, so it's
50,000.
increasing. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
that's
and
cool.
it kept on increasing. And so that's where, the flywheel started spinning, and that was really kind of the initial sort of inflection point. And we've been lucky that since then, growth has remained, steady, and we want to just continue to build on that momentum.
Is it like somebody shares it? Like you send me a presentation or a link and there's like, made with Gamma, like try it out type thing. Like do a lot of people come from that? Or is it like they go to Google and they just search Gamma, like what is this? They make a slide, like AI generated slides. Like is there certain channels that seem to work better kind of in those as you kind of really scaled up?
Yeah, there is a good chunk of like when you share like a free Gamma, you'll see the Made with Gamma badge, and people come through that. The vast majority of it is more through like word of mouth. So someone might say, you know, yeah, I'm using Gamma for this, or like if you're presenting, for instance, like you'll see that it's being used in Gamma, being served by Gamma, and so people will then just inherently ask like, oh, what are you using? And then people that really love the product are telling all their friends, and so then their friends will go and search for it or come direct. So that still ends up becoming the most, for us, the most meaningful channel, is just strong word of mouth.
Hmm. And then how do you think you stand out today as an AI company? Like what's the most important thing? Because there's a lot of people doing a lot of different things. They're all growing pretty fast, or some of them are growing pretty fast. What becomes most important when everything's kind of AI native?
What becomes most important is still the question of how much is the human in the loop, and are you creating something that completely replaces the human, or can the human have the ability to actually still be part of the experience and edit and shape? We're actually approaching that from, I think, a few different ways. Like for our core prosumer product, where the end user, it needs to be a delightful experience. You go in and you can get a great first draft, and then the human can continue to like nudge and push things in the right direction. Like we want that to feel, again, like effortless. It should feel like something you go in, it feels nice. It's not the PowerPoint moment I described, which is like I'm really dreading going into this, and like I worry about touching anything because it's so fragile and it's just going to mess up the entire layout. We want that to not be the case. And so our, I think, unique advantage is like human and AI working well together. And like as the AI gets better and more capable, it can just really guide that experience too. But the human is the driver, still the person, navigating. I think where we're going to be exploring much more automation is, via our API, where being able to allow others to build on top of Gamma, and where maybe things can actually be almost fully or almost entirely automated, and where a human doesn't necessarily need to go in as much, and it's more about like how can you create content at scale reliably, predictably, and then what does that really give to you? And so I think that might have a different set of constraints overall, and maybe an overarching different approach, but that can also be equally powerful, and we want to be able to serve both audiences well.
So what's the API? Maybe I have an idea of it, but that sounds kind of interesting. What is that going to be?
Yeah, it's going to be there'll be a few different flavors of it, but essentially it's being able to allow people to combine their first party data and feed that into something like Gamma, where we are now the content engine. So no matter what you might need to do in terms of like combining that information and like shaping it for different outputs. So, you know, it's a report, a PDF, a slide deck, whatever it may be as your output, like we'll help you automate all of that and just run in the background. We're the sort of content infrastructure for you. And you are just piping us basically what you need to be shaped and distributed.
So what all that could that connect to? Like Salesforce, your data warehouse, like
All sorts of things. Yeah, you can imagine obviously for a sales use case, any of the customer, wherever customer data might live or customer information might live. If you're, a consultant and you need to tap into a body of research that you've done and, pull that in. Anytime you want to personalize or like be able to like, do specific types of market research or pull from different geos, zip codes, like all of that can be piped in, and and so it really depends on what data you have access to, and what you want Gamma to be able to take advantage of.
interesting. So if I'm like a teacher, maybe like the report card for a kid could be hooked up to this, and like I'm sending you your kid's report card, and it's just hooked up into whatever my grading software is. I don't know what teachers use, but it sounds like that might be a use case.
There could be definitely something there, and I think even like simpler than that is just maybe personalizing some of the content that goes out. So like for certain types of students, you include certain types of, information, or maybe for certain types of learners, you might give them more visual content versus stuff that is more long form information dense, right? Like if all those things are knobs that can be controlled. And so rather than having a one size fits all sort of content production, like you might actually fine tune a lot of it in the background and just allow that engine to run and spit out what needs to be spit out.
And then this is a little bit of a different topic, but I'm curious. You're kind of one of the, you're kind of sitting at the forefront of AI. How are you guys using it internally? Are there any interesting things you've done to kind of leverage? I'm assuming you're smiling, so there's just got to be some stuff you've done, like maybe the secrets that you're willing to share. What are some of the cooler ways you guys use AI internally?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's anything crazy. It is basically the way we use AI is that every corner of, the company tries to deploy AI or leverage AI, and it's a constant sort of learning, sharing, and this willingness to try certain things out. Some things are still in uncanny, valley territory, and that's fine, but we're able to like test it. And so, yeah, whether or not like, I'm sure, other AI startups are doing similar things where like engineers are exploring, the cursors of the world, designers are exploring leverables, bolts to help with prototyping. Marketing team is constantly leveraging different, deep research tools or tools like Notebook LM to like synthesize vast amounts of like customer data to create personas, create, archetypes of like different customers we're going after. And then customer support, leaning on infrastructure built by like Fin and Intercom, and then like using that to create like better support content and like really, creating that flywheel of like where there are gaps in our own sort of, help center content and like streamlining, automating that. We use a ton of AI to localize our product and so get like sort of machine translated content out in different forms of our web app as well as our marketing site, and then going in and also having humans like review that and improve upon it. So honestly, it's like every single function is deploying some version of AI and AI tooling. And the question is just like how much can we kind of use that as great leverage as we continue to build. Every single person should be thinking about like actually building in a way that and sort of incorporates AI as part of the plan, not just like a nice to have. It's a must have, and it might look different at different stages, and it might look different for different functions. But everybody's thinking about it.
I'm assuming you use Gamma too internally.
Oh yeah, of course. We're
Okay, you didn't
we're
mention
dog
it, so I was
fooding
like,
it
I hope you're using it.
every team meeting presentation, and we even have fun use cases around Fridays. We have this thing called Gamma which team member can present on just a fun topic, something silly. It could be something related to just pop culture and like just educating the rest of the team, but using Gamma to create that presentation. So we try to have fun with it, but also use it as the actual tool we communicate information with.
Do you have a favorite while we're talking about AI tools? Do you have like a favorite kind of like under the radar or new one you've discovered? Or are you still just like ChatGPT is kind of the king?
I mean, it really still feels like ChatGPT is the king. I mean, there's been a few out there that I want to spend more time playing with, like granolas of the world seem interesting. Obviously, Optimize a founder, Dan creating Limitless, which seems like a really cool application. So there's so many out there, and more of them. I'm trying to figure out how to fold them in and give them a try.
One thing I kind of want to talk about, anything that you guys specifically do differently from other companies in San Francisco? I mean, we kind of hit on a little bit, but maybe some of those constraints has kind of molded how you guys think or operate that's maybe a little different than kind of your down the fairway, venture backed, hyper growth startup.
I would say there's you know some big differences in just the culture and how we operate. So one is, I think, you know there's this tendency right now to believe that all the hyper growth AI startups are operating their 996 shops, which I don't know if you're familiar with, but 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week in the office in person, and that's everybody. And we do not do that. We have very flexible, sort of more hybrid work culture where we're primarily based in San Francisco. Most people come into the office most days of the week, but it's not mandatory. Like we don't force that. We have basically anchor days, Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, where most of the team is in because we have our team meetings. But when you need to be, like you want some focus time, and working from home is like the optimal way to do that. Like that's totally fine by us. And we are also not of the culture of like being a boiler room where the pressure is just constantly there. We're trying to build for the long haul, which means we're constantly trying to balance like how much sort of creative energy you can bring into building a product like ours requires like the level of energy where you can't just like force that through brute force energy, just working endless hours. It needs to be that you have space to think, space to be energized and like recharge your batteries. And we really much encourage that. But like, for us in person obviously still has its benefits. So we haven't moved completely remote. Like we still want to be able to be in the same room, jam on things together very, very frequently. It just doesn't need to be 24/7.
Yeah, it sounds like it's working because your point earlier, you haven't had any turnover yet. Sounds like and it's been pretty successful for everything I can see from the outside at least. So seems like it's working.
Yeah, it's working so far. And I guess, what everyone will want to see just, what do the next 4 or 5 years look like? We're 4 years into our journey now. And a lot of these hyper growth startups are, maybe even earlier into their journey. So they're 1, 2, 3 years into it. And so yeah, I think there's many different ways to win, and as a founding team, you got to find the way that feels authentic to you, and one that you believe you can sustain for a long, long time. Because regardless of what type of startup you're building, if you want to be successful, it's not a 1, 2 year journey for most. It's a multi-year, if not multi-decade journey. And so, give yourself a chance to kind of be on that journey for long enough. I think that's the sort of mindset we've tried to have.
So on that note, how do you balance trying to grow fast and meet the moment, but also, you know, not burning too much cash, remaining profitable, not spending it on dumb stuff that you don't need, or like, has there been anything you've kind of like been able to center around of just like the right balance of that? Because I feel like that's a struggle everyone kind of deals with.
Yeah, the way we balance it is to inherently infuse some natural tension into this. So we create tension by, our internal mantra is like hire painfully slow, which means like we don't open up a bunch of headcount. We know that the team is going to remain lean. What that means is like each team member needs to take on a ton of ownership and has high agency, can do things. We try to have a very complementary set of teammates, and we optimize for the type of people we're hiring, like generalists over specialists. And we, even at the sort of manager level, try to invest more in developing player coaches. So rather than the traditional management layer where you might bring on the VP with their Rolodex and they fill out the entire org chart by hiring, we do that by having these player coaches that are people that have managed in the past but really still love the IC work and can be great mentors and coaches to those around them, and can play a role in strategy but are still plugged in to the day to day. And so all that means that we can move fast We feel the sort of scrappiness inherently. We bake in, we try to time box things a lot. So we're setting our own deadlines so that we aren't just kind of letting ourselves drift infinitely into like exploration, but there's some sort of semblance of like progress and we can measure ourselves against that. So all those are things like you kind of have to naturally kind of instill the tension and then be comfortable with it and be open when things maybe aren't working well. And so being in a culture of high feedback, like culture of feedback, like all those are important ways to sort of craft your own sort of engineer your own sort of urgency into the whole setup.
Yeah, and you mentioned a couple times this 4 month window. Like, do you guys do product sprints in 4 months? Like, is there some significance of that, or?
It's kind of organically how it's happened. And I think what I've found is that, obviously hard to sprint indefinitely, right? Like if you just don't have a timeline and people are just sprinting forever, it's really hard. Almost anybody can say, I can crank really hard for a quarter. And that 4 month is just like, you need a quarter and a little bit. Like
It's an
you need to
extra month.
last,
Yeah.
you need to last not just a quarter, you're gonna have to go beyond that. And it's like that mentality, I think for whatever reason, it just has felt like enough time to like, get our ducks in a row, enough time to build what we need to build, and then feel like it's still an appropriate deadline where we do that and it's not forever. It's like, okay, we have a few months here. Let's make sure we got our stuff together.
Do you give yourself like a wind down period after that? Like after a 4 month sprint, you're like, all right, we're like taking it easy for a month or two or something. Like, do you like kind of balance those like sine waves almost, or?
Yeah, I guess we don't really talk about it in terms of like, oh, we're just gonna let our, foot off the gas, take a break. It's mostly because after that, there's a whole bunch of like bugs that need to be fixed or things that we didn't get right and we need to kind of iterate. So I think it just allows us like we were building, 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 and now it's like, okay, let's learn a little bit, see what's going on. Make sure in some cases where there's immediate fires that need to be put out, we can put those out. And then we don't go immediately back into a 4 month sprint. There's always like some sort of period where we're actually learning, from what's been valuable to the end users. And that sort of period ends up being a little bit more organic. Like it may be, 1 month, it may be a few months, and then we'll start thinking about the next sort of 4 month milestone.
Hmm. Maybe it's like a calibration period or something
Totally.
where,
Yeah. Yeah.
you're still like foot on the gas, but you're just like sensing of like, are we still going somewhere, still driving, but what do we need to like, level set or, adjust, course correct?
100%. Yeah. Yeah. And there's oftentimes quite a bit because like you can go in assuming you know all the answers, but oftentimes things that'll be surprising that you have gotten wrong.
Yeah. So I have two more questions. They're both like kind of maybe more selfish questions, but I have two kids. Like we both have two kids who are the same age. Any just like, I don't know, parenting tricks or like, especially with like running a hyper growth startup, like anything you found that just works for like being a good parent plus, operator? Like what have you learned that's kind of worked the best?
For me, what's worked the best is like being very diligent about being on like a routine. And so I think part of this is like you're going to be your best self when you feel healthy and well rested. And the only way you do that is by being healthy and well rested. And so like being really like I think what is it? Brian Johnson has the saying of like you basically have to be a professional sleeper. Like sleep should be your extra job. And if when you show up late to your job, you feel bad about yourself. Like if you show up late to sleep, like yeah, that you shouldn't feel great. And so getting that in is like the foundation. Sleep then trickles into like being able to have energy to exercise and like fitting then that into your schedule, like being super diligent about making sure you carve out enough time. And then like from that like comes nutrition. Is like it ends up becoming pretty obvious. Like you have those three in a good place, I think the rest can follow, and then you can feel like when you show up to being a parent, like you actually have the energy. You can actually have fun and play, and so easier said than done. But I feel like it all starts with like being on that routine and being as sort of rigorous about like making sure nothing gets in the way of that. And if you can do that, I feel like everything else is like hopefully the dominoes can fall in the right place.
Yeah, I feel like my two kids are both like an awesome age now where they want to like play board games, play card games. We've been playing Minecraft the past like month or two, and I'm like, how am I so lucky that just like my kids just like if I had nothing else to do, I would just like play video games or like play board games. So this is kind of awesome. I get to do it, and it's like it's you don't want to play video games all the time with your kids. You try to limit the screen time, but it's like this is fun. Like this is actually enjoyable.
No, I think you're winning. You got it right.
Yeah. So do you have last question? Do you have like a favorite like founder, CEO, or business that you kind of like learned from, just like throughout history? I mean, this can be like the Rockefeller, or it can be like, maybe more like modern recent example, but any like stories or founders or companies that you've gotten a lot of inspiration from?
I mean, I am definitely a Nike fanboy and an Apple. I think with some of these brands that have just built enduring businesses, so much of it is about recognizing early on that there's also this community element, and you as a founder play a specific role, like particularly special role in sort of nurturing that early on. So for us, it's like what that translates into, like we have our own Slack workspace for our power users. We call it ambassadors, where
Like
I'm
ambassadors, that's
yeah,
an amazing
Basper,
name.
yeah. And I'm still, daily checking that and trying to interface, and like whether or not it's like helping them use Gamma or just helping them out in any other way. Like many of them are building their own businesses and are looking for advice or need help in a certain way. And I don't always have the answers, but I do try to seek and give them some guidance or introduce them to someone that might be able to. And that part of it feels good. It feels like we're building not just a product, we're building the sort of community. And yeah, that sort of thing needs to be done brick by brick. And I think obviously the Nikes of the world have shown that it's not like, you kind of just set it, forget it. It's like, oh, those relationships are humans, and those humans require, a lot of sort of input from you, and like built nurturing that just takes a lot of time and investment. And if you believe it's worth it, you should do it. And so for us, like that's been from day one, we really believe that it's something worth doing. And hopefully someday I can just continue to carve out time that, it's something that we really believe is important.
And so what does exactly mean, like building a community or having a community? Like, does that mean that the people that use the product talk to each other? They have their own identity? Does it mean you as the founder or as the company or the brand are interacting with them? I mean, maybe it's all those things, but what does that mean exactly?
Yeah, in the very beginning of community building, it very much is a kind of you, and then finding like individuals out there that see something about your product and trying to just build some of that relationship. And in many cases, they need a little bit help, like getting the most out of your product. In other cases, they're eager to give you feedback on how to improve the product. And so just giving them a channel to like talk to you, I think is important, and like deeply empathizing with what you could be doing better. And then the long-term goal is like you build a community that's then self-sustaining. You have other community members helping each other, and you are no longer part of the conversation. You have left the chat, right? Like
Yeah.
you're out of it. And you can then just observe like them like being so excited to help another person like get to a good place, because they know what it feels like to like have a product that can serve them in some way and like unlock some incredible thing for them, whether it's like extending their business or like getting helping them build all the content they've always wanted to build. And so that's like a magical moment, and we're kind of on that part of the journey. And obviously that community can start small, and then eventually you want that to be something that's global, where people have this affiliation with your brand and your product and a deep love for it. And that's the dream state, right? Like, if that happens, then, you're just kind of out there trying to just push the boundaries on the product, and the rest kind of happens more organically. And we're really trying to build towards that, like where we can be one where the product, gets shipped, and we have, the millions of people out there just championing the product and just excited to share with the next person.
Yeah, because in a way, they're almost like a extension of the team, in the sense of like they're kind of doing your marketing for you. They're kind of doing your customer support. They're kind of like R&D, and like
100%. Yeah.
so it's like shift those off balance sheet or off income statement, and like just makes a stronger business more profitable.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that gets like, it's so underrated because it's not quantifiable, right? It's like accounting is very quantifiable. I can go say, hey, what was my payroll last month? But yeah, like that value that you just described, like that's hard to quantify. But if you get it, man, that's like a secret sauce, and it could be, lightning in a bottle that you can just keep and kind of fuel, future growth for your company.
Yeah. Is there a moment that you know that you have it? Like, was there a moment when you kind of knew like we have a community, quote unquote? Like, is it the word of mouth thing usually, or?
There's definitely an element of that, but I think it's the same thing as like when people talk about like product market fit. It's like, when you think about like product market fit, it's sort of this thing that's almost like fleeting, or like, the game gets harder. So like you might have product market fit in a small TAM, but like if you want to go after a massive TAM, the product needs to change and you're going after a bigger market. And so for us, the same thing is like, yeah, we have, a small community of users today that love the product. to become a global community, that's, the product needs to evolve, the way we interact with the community needs to evolve, what they get out of being in that community needs to evolve. And so yeah, we're at the small stages of like growing what we think to be, enduring and special community. But it's like, yeah, ton more investment needs to be required, and hopefully we can actually, fulfill that over the many, many years ahead.
Well, Grant, this is a lot of fun. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks so much, Trevor. Yeah, this is great. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, and just real quick, where can people find you? Like, we want to look you up. Twitter, LinkedIn, both of those.
I'm trying to be active both on Twitter and LinkedIn. So just Grant Lee. And yeah, love a follow. If there's anything I can do to help, please reach out. Love to connect as well.
Yeah, I feel like your Twitter, you tweet like what you're seeing.
Yeah, appreciate it. Trying to. I think there's so much fun stuff going on in the world.
Cool. Well, thanks, Sam, for doing this.
All right, thanks. Take care.
And thank you for listening. And thank you to Ramp for saving us all time and money, and to Numeral for putting our sales tax on autopilot. If you missed it, make sure to check out last week's episode with Ryan Stockton at 3Flow on AI opportunities in the $2 trillion employee benefits market. Tune in over the next few weeks for conversations with Matt Mullenweg, the founder of WordPress, which powers over 43% of all websites on the internet. Garrett Lord, the founder of Handshake, college recruiting platform that's emerged as a leader filling the massive opportunity in AI data labeling, and Owen McCabe on Intercom's impressive turnaround from traditional SaaS to AI native customer service platform. If you don't want to miss any of these future episodes, subscribe to my newsletter, The Split, in the description to get each episode plus a transcript emailed directly to your inbox every week. And finally, if you like this, please leave a quick review or comment wherever you're listening or watching, and let me know if you have any feedback or thoughts on this or any other episode. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.